Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
You know how you get to know the delivery people when you order things a lot? Well, that's how it started for me. I work from home, and with my busy schedule, I often find myself ordering everything online, from groceries to clothes to work-related stuff. It's just so convenient, but it also means that I see the delivery folks pretty often. There was this one guy, Mike, who was on the same delivery route as my apartment. At first, he seemed just like any other delivery person, friendly, professional, doing his job. I would see him a few times a week, handing me packages with a smile. We would exchange pleasantries, like you do when you see someone often, something like, "Oh, it's a nice weather today." Or, "Thank you, have a good one." Just simple stuff. But after a while, I noticed that he started chatting a bit more. He would be asking about my day, what I did for work, and I didn't think much of it though. I figured he was just being nice and chatty. We all have those days where we want to talk a little more than usual, right? But then, the conversation started feeling off. One day, he left me a small potted plant with a note. It said something like, "I hope this brightens your home." I was surprised, but I just brushed it off. Maybe he was thinking that he was being friendly. But then it happened again. And this time, it was a book, something that I mentioned in passing that I wanted to read. Again, there was a note, something simple like, "I thought that you would enjoy this." I started feeling uneasy. These small gifts felt personal. It wasn't like I'd given him permission to leave me things outside of his job. It felt invasive, like he was stepping into my space without asking. But I told myself not to overreact. A couple of days go by, and then it escalated. I came home one day to find a bag of groceries at my door. Not just any other random grocery, but the exact items that I usually ordered. My stomach twisted. How did he know what I bought? Had he been looking at my delivery details? It was too much. It was too personal. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. It wasn't normal for a delivery person to know this much about me. I started feeling anxious every time that I saw the delivery van pull up. I didn't want to open the door anymore. I decided that I had to do something about it, so I reached out to the delivery company. I explained that a driver was leaving me personal gifts and how uncomfortable it made me feel. They did sound concerned, which was a relief to me. They assured me that they would look into it and then address the situation. For a while, things were quiet. I didn't see Mike, and my deliveries came from different drivers. I started to relax, thinking that maybe the company had reassigned him somewhere else. I hoped that it would end there and that he would understand how his actions crossed the line. But then one evening, I came home to find a handwritten letter at my door. My heart sank as I recognized Mike's handwriting. He wrote about how he missed our chats, that he hoped that I was doing well. It was so unsettling to think that this guy knows where I lived and that he felt entitled to continue reaching out despite my clear discomfort. I contacted the company again the next day. I stressed how serious the situation felt and how it was affecting my sense of safety in my own home. They apologized profusely and promised to take stricter action. They said that they would ensure that he wouldn't have access to my route or my details again. Luckily, after that, I stopped seeing any signs of Mike. The delivery company must have rerouted him or dealt with the situation somehow. I was relieved but it also left me with a lingering unease. It's strange how something so seemingly innocent, like receiving gifts and attention, can twist into something darker. The whole experience made me rethink how I interact with people who come in and out of my life. It's sad to say, but it made me more cautious, more guarded. I pay closer attention to what I share and with whom. It's just the balance between being friendly and keeping those boundaries clear. In the end, the deliveries went back to normal, and I found peace in the familiar rhythm of my life. While things have settled down, I often think about how easily someone's good intentions, or what they perceive as good, can blur into something so intrusive. It's a lesson that I didn't expect to learn from ordering groceries, but here we are. Life is just funny like that, I guess, full of surprises, either for better or for worse. I, a 19-year-old female, study in a university. During the semester, I noticed that someone had been checking off my own attendance on our class sheet. I didn't know anyone at all, so I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. A week later, a guy sitting in front of me started talking to me, and he seemed really friendly. Eventually, he asked for my contact info, claiming that he needed help for classwork, and I gave it to him. After that, he started spamming me with messages, stickers, and videos in class. Whenever he noticed that I left them on read, he would turn around to check if I was on my phone to respond. He'd also track when I was last online. I would shoot looks to get my attention. Strangely, he would browse my profile pictures and stare blankly at them, not typing anything, just frozen. I did tell him that I needed to focus, but it didn't stop him from spamming anyway. He purposely angles his screen so that I can see everything that he's doing, and it's creepy seeing how obsessively he monitors our chat. He also started to ask for hugs. A couple of days ago was my last class for this year with him. I saw that the pen ink used to check off his name was the same color used for mine on the attendance sheet. So I put two and two together, and I'm pretty sure that it's him all along. I just talked to him and he denies it, but if he is telling the truth, then this situation is even weirder. His behavior has only been limited to class hours, so I just want to know if I'm being unnecessarily creeped out. I was physically followed at my previous job, and it made me really wary since then. I just want to know if maybe he's just socially awkward, and after a while, he'll stop? He's going to be in the same class as me next year too. Update. I just confronted him, and he is more avoidant of me now, so I would like to thank everyone for their advice. This happened quite a few years ago. I had an affinity for a particular white substance in the form of lines back then. And one very cold snowy night at around 11 p.m., I went for a walk to meet my dealer. I had never been to his place before, so he gave me the address to his small 2-story apartment building with maybe 6 units in it. Upon arrival, I noticed several strangers inside. After they had hit their pipes, 2 clearly unwashed guys came over to sit at the dining table while I waited for my G. I've never smoked anything besides weed and cigarettes. I was instantly uncomfortable by this. They tried making small talk, but I grew increasingly uneasy, giving only short, vague answers. I quickly paid for my stuff. I grabbed the baggie and I got up from the table. That's when one of the guys offered to walk me home. My heart started to sink and I politely declined. "Oh, I'm okay, thanks. I don't live far." The other guy stood up and said, "No, really, We can walk you. We don't mind. We have to get going anyway. That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I became very aware and very scared, and I immediately thought that I'm fully dressed and ready to go, but they still have to put on their coats and shoes. If I leave now, I'll get a head start and quickly disappear. They said something else as I headed for the door, but I pretended to take a phone call. I waved goodbye to my dealer, and I closed the door behind me. I then jogged down the hallway to the outside door, and once I got outside, I ran for the street. I decided not to take the fast route home because, from the building, they'd be able to see me. I didn't want them knowing even the slightest direction that I lived in if they were really following me. The building was at the end of the street, so instead of going straight up the hill, the way that I initially came from, I turned right and I started jogging. I kept glancing back and finally, I saw them, about a block behind, following me. The street I needed, Stanley Street, was across the intersection on my left, about another block ahead at a four-way light. As I approached the intersection, I noticed the corner house on my right. There was an older man sitting on his porch, smoking, and I recognized him. He was also another dealer that I had met only once a few weeks before when my usual guy was dry. I choked up as I got to his porch and asked if he remembered me. He did, and he asked, "What's wrong?" I quietly told him, "I think these two guys are following me," and asked if I could go inside for a minute until they passed. He didn't hesitate. We went inside past his front living room and then into the kitchen, where I explained what happened. He told me not to worry, that I was safe there and I could stay as long as I needed to. Then, we heard a knock at the door and I started to panic. He went to the door, looked through the peephole and yelled, "Just a minute!" He came back quickly and then whispered that he knew the guys and that he was going to invite them in to have a hit. He told me to sneak out through his back door, which was beyond the kitchen, and then go to the right of the yard and find the gate. This would lead to a side street. He instructed me to creep up along the side of the house, close to the shrubs, and check the porch to make sure that they went inside. I followed his plan, and when the coast was clear, I didn't jog. I sprinted up Stanley Street and I zigzagged all the way home. When I think back now, I am in disbelief at my actions and how foolish I was. I thought I was invincible. I was far too trusting, but I truly thank God for the man who helped me that night. I don't know what those two guys wanted from me, but I'm forever grateful that I never had to find out. I'm a 29-year-old man from the Philippines, and even though this incident occurred back in 2013, over a decade ago, I still find myself haunted by it every time that I return to my hometown. At that time, I was just an 18-year-old college student. It was the night of our department's socialization party, which had wrapped up around midnight. As the only one among my friends with a car, I had always taken the role of the designated driver. And after dropping my friends off at their homes, I was parking in my usual spot, just a few houses away from my own, due to the limited parking in our area. As I was about to exit the car, I noticed a girl standing near the entrance of the alleyway leading to my house and several others. She was wearing a shirt with our department's logo, so I assumed that she had just walked back from the party. But in front of her was a man in his late 20s. He was clad in a hoodie, stood ominously, seemingly blocking her path. The girls then locked eyes with me, and I immediately recognized her expression. It was a silent plea for help. My instincts kicked in. I grabbed my bag and I stepped out of the car. The man, noticing my presence, began to walk into the alleyway, and when I reached the girl, he had vanished from sight. It felt as though whatever threatening situation had occurred moments before was over, and I was tempted to walk away. But then, I caught sight of the strange man again. He was leaning against the wall of a nearby house, and his gaze fixed on me. A chill ran down my spine, and just then, the girl called out from behind me. Her voice trembled with fear, and I saw her approach, visibly shaken. "Can you walk with me to my apartment at the end of the alleyway?" she asked, explaining that the man had been silently blocking her way. I glanced back at the man. He appeared intoxicated, perhaps drunk or on drugs. We began to walk, our breathing shallow as we passed him. And after putting some distance between us, I glanced back, but to my horror, he was following us. We had already passed my house at that point, but I couldn't leave this girl to face him alone. As fear coursed through me, she suddenly broke into a full sprint, and I had no choice but to keep pace with her. We reached the gate to her apartment, and she hastily swung it open, slamming it shut behind us. We then dashed into the building where a second gate stood, this one smaller, likely designed to keep pets from escaping. She opened it, and then we slipped through, just as the sound of the man approaching the first gate reached our ears. We bolted up the stairs, making our way to the third floor. Breathless, the girl knocked urgently but softly at her apartment door, and after what felt like an eternity, it swung open, revealing her friends, a guy and a girl, around her age. They looked bewildered but quickly locked the door behind us and then led us into the bedroom. They turned off the lights, and we just sat there silently, with our hearts pounding. The girl broke down in tears, recounting the terrifying events to her friends. She revealed that the man had been following her for 10 to 15 minutes, and she expressed her relief at having seen me. Unsure of what to do next, I just called my aunt, who was staying at our house that night. And thankfully she answered swiftly. I urged her to call the police, and at this time, we could now hear the man pacing around the apartment, seemingly looking for us. He was mumbling something that we couldn't hear well from the other side of the door. A few minutes later, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was my uncle, a policeman, reassuring me that help was on the way. What felt like hours dragged on, and eventually the police arrived. My uncle instructed me via phone to come downstairs and recount the ordeal to the officers. They informed us that they had seen the man wandering around the gate and eventually into the far end of the alleyway. And once the police had finished their inquiries, they allowed me to go home. I recounted the entire story to my aunt, who urged me to get some rest. Despite my exhaustion though, sleep eluded me as my mind raced with thoughts of that strange man. What if he had caught up with us? Was he armed with a knife or some weapon? I fought to dispel the terrifying images racing through my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he might be watching me in the dark, a knife glinting menacingly in his hand. So, I am not necessarily sure whether this counts as a creepy or more so just unsettling, but here it is. This summer, I went to LA to spend time with my boyfriend, and me, being European, became obsessed with Target. Hence, we would often venture in there to browse a bit and whatnot. This particular store was in a rather nice area of LA, so I never had to really worry about some creeps, but here we are. Anyway, we decided to go to Target on a nice afternoon, and I could spot some people standing in front of the entrance while walking from the car. Generally speaking, I usually don't think much of this, since people wait to be picked up and whatnot. But there was this one guy who just looked kinda off, like I got immediate bad vibes from him, and he kept staring at everyone walking by. What ticked me off is how he stared at me and my boyfriend walking by for just a tad bit longer. I saw him in my peripheral, just taking off right after us and walking into Target. And hear me out, I am naturally a very observant person. I've had my fair share of creeps, and I stand on business when it comes to observing my surroundings. Anyway, I tried glancing over my shoulder in a very subtle way to check if he's still there, and as you can guess, not even 10 feet behind, there he was. My boyfriend was completely oblivious to the whole thing, so I started to suggest going into different aisles to see if this guy will still follow. I didn't tell him because I didn't want to make him stress if I didn't have a super valid suspicion. And would you look at that, every time that I look around, there he was just staring at me. So I kept trying to test my theory until he just suddenly vanished. I just thought, I'm just being paranoid again. So I thought that we would grab a drink from Starbucks on the way out since everything is okay. We go to Starbucks, and I'm still glancing around to see if I can spot the guy anywhere around. But nope, nothing. So we happily take off towards the exit, and there he was, just waiting. I saw the moment he spotted us and just smirked and then just proceeded to follow us to the car. And at this point, I'm like, screw this, and I said to my boyfriend very quietly, "Hey, someone has been following us since we walked in. I lost him in the store, but he was waiting by the exit. He's right behind us. Don't make it obvious. Just get into the car and lock it as fast as you can." So, my boyfriend looked behind, and would you look at that? The guy was following us to the car very closely behind. The moment that we were by the car, my boyfriend just unlocks the door and we get in as fast as we can and just lock that shit because what if he tries to get in? But the man just stood behind the car, staring through our back window right at us, and then proceeded to just walk away like nothing happened. The weirdest thing? When we pulled out of the parking spot, not even 10 seconds later, the guy just vanished into thin air, nowhere to be seen. I have never been so paranoid in my entire life if he got into another car and maybe tried to follow us home. But after that, we just got back home and everything just seemed so oddly normal, besides my minor heart palpitations. I still don't understand what might have been the purpose of the whole thing, but boy, it scared me just fine. My encounter when I was 14. So when I was 14, I liked to go for walks alone. Just me, some music, and wherever I decided to go. One day, it might have been early spring, I'm walking through a beautiful wooded area with the sun glimpsing through the branches and leaves. I then saw a man I'd say around mid-30s, walking and looking around in the opposite direction to me. He then turned to me and asked if I had seen his dog. Me, being oblivious to what he said no, and then I tried to walk away. But he seemed really desperate and upset, practically begging for my help. So eventually, I agreed and I helped him look for close to an hour. He then disappeared down a heavily wooded area and called out that he found his dog and needed help to free him from some branches. Me, being relieved to have found the dog, was originally skeptical to go in after him, but stupidly I did. It was only then where I found the man's true intentions. He had pulled his trousers and pants down and wanted me to do unspeakable things to him. I stood frozen as he only stepped closer towards me. In a panic, I ran while trying to take photos of him to show anyone for help. But as I ran, he chased close behind. We came to a bridge which was over a river. Don't ask me how I did it, but I managed to slip, dropping my phone into the river. I scrambled to my feet and I continued to run. Then I realized that he wasn't chasing me anymore, and he had seemingly disappeared. I never told anyone this story because I thought no one would believe me. But now, I'm 17, happily in a relationship, and it's been on my mind for the last 4 years, so now I just have to tell someone. Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. I'm 31 and female. When I first moved into that old brick apartment building, I was drawn to its charm. The neighborhood was quiet, with tree-lined streets and friendly faces. For someone starting anew, it felt perfect. My one-bedroom apartment was on the 3rd floor, offering a view of the little park across the street. It was cozy, and it was just right for my needs. Settling in took time. I painted the walls with soft shades of blue and gray. I hung pictures and filled the shelves with books and tiny little trinkets from my travels. The place slowly became my home, and I found peace in my routines and in the gentle hum of life around me. The building itself was not large, just 4 floors with a handful of apartments on each. People came and went, and we exchanged polite nods in the hallways. Among those people was Mr. Barrett, who lived directly below me. He was an older man with a kind face and had a habit of striking up conversations about the weather or city events. At first, his friendliness was a comfort to me, a sign of the welcoming community that I was now a part of. But after a few weeks, I noticed small things out of place in my apartment. A book moved from the shelf to the coffee table, a mug left in the sink when I remembered washing it. I just shrugged it off, attributing it to my own forgetfulness. Life was hectic. I had a new job, a new environment, and it was easy to overlook things. The feeling of being watched began to creep in though. It's a sensation that prickled at the back of my neck when I was alone. I dismissed it as paranoia, especially that I live alone and I'm in a new place. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just nerves. But then, the noises came. Late at night, footsteps above me when I knew the apartment was vacant. Faint taps on the walls, as if someone was listening. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, straining to hear more. But the sounds would cease as suddenly as they started. My mind raced with different explanations. Old pipes, settling foundations. I clung to logic even as doubt gnawed at me. Mr. Barrett's presence also became more noticeable. He seemed to appear whenever I left or arrived home, lingering just a moment too long in shared spaces in the building. His questions, once charming and friendly, felt intrusive, like he was prying into my routines and my plans. I began to take longer routes, avoiding paths where our encounters seemed inevitable. But despite my efforts, his interest persisted. He left small tokens at my doors when he stopped seeing me. It would either be freshly baked cookies, a book he thought that I would like, and initially, I accepted these gestures with forced politeness. Yet each gift felt like he was binding me to his attention. It was an unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake. One rainy evening, after a particularly long day at work, I entered my apartment to find a strange scent in the air. Mr. Barrett's cologne. Let me tell you, ever since the moment that I met this guy, I have noticed the scent of his cologne, and he uses the exact same thing every single time. And that cologne lingered in my apartment unpleasantly that night. I panicked. I checked the door, the windows, all where as I had left them. The thought of him being inside, invading my space, sent a shiver down my spine. I considered reaching out to the building manager, but I hesitated. I was unsure of how to explain what felt like a series of coincidences. Without concrete evidence, my concerns seemed trivial, and overreaction from stress or fatigue. So, I just decided to request a change of my locks, hoping that would bring peace of mind. My life continued, my days blurring into one another. I tried to distract myself through my job and my friends, yet at night, the feeling of being observed returned, stronger and more pervasive. I'm not the type to lock doors inside my house, but I took to sleeping with my bedroom door locked. It was a small act that offered little comfort. Really, they could break it down if they wanted to. But knowing that it was locked was so much better than not doing anything. One morning, as I left for work, I noticed Mr. Barrett watching from his window, his gaze following me down the street. It was unnerving, the constant awareness of being under scrutiny. I resolved to be more vigilant and also to document every single odd occurrence so that I may build my case if needed. Weeks passed and the situation escalated. On a warm Sunday afternoon, I returned from the market to find my apartment door ajar. My heart raced, fear twisting in my stomach. I stepped inside cautiously, noting the subtle disturbances. A chair moved to a different side, a drawer that was fully closed and now open. Ever since things like this started happening, I've been extremely vigilant and aware of things in my apartment, to the point that I would take a picture before I leave so that I can assure myself that I was not just losing my mind, but that something was really moved. But the most unsettling was that my journal, one that was tucked away in a drawer, now splayed open on the coffee table. The pages were turned, my handwriting and my intimate thoughts laid bare. I was angry, and I was scared at the same time. This invasion was personal, deliberate. I documented everything just as I had been doing, and I brought to the management all the evidence and observations that I have gathered, and they approved to check the cameras in the hallways. Well, the footage revealed what I dreaded. Mr. Barrett entering my apartment. Armed with this evidence, I filed a formal complaint to the building management. The response was swift, decisive. Mr. Barrett was confronted. His key was confiscated. My locks was to be changed immediately. But they did not want to kick him out though. I threatened to involve the police if they didn't, and they probably did not want any bad press or issues, so they decided to kick him out. What's weird is that when all of this happened, Mr. Barrett remained silent. He didn't deny anything. He didn't try to explain his side, defend himself, tell us where he got the key to my apartment from. And all he did was just give me an unsettling stare. And to this day, I still live in the apartment. Everything is normal now, but sometimes, when I'm outside, I look over my shoulders. I have that little fear inside me that one day he might get back at me. Also, my doors are always locked now and I got my own camera. Mr. Barrett, I hope that I never see you again. For context, this happened to me years ago when I was about 13, maybe 14. I grew up in a small to mid-sized city in the West, pretty safe in a quiet middle-class neighborhood. This was back when I still bought into organized religion and I was going to an overnight lock-in at the church gym. For the non-Christian kids who aren't familiar, it's basically a huge Jesus-focused sleepover for teens. The church was only maybe a 10 to 12 minute walk from my house, and the quickest way to get there was to cut across a park right next to the elementary school. This was the early 2000s, so I definitely grew up in the age of stranger danger and teaching girls to always be vigilant. On the other hand, I was walking a short distance through my own neighborhood to the church, and I was very responsible for my age. I was an oldest daughter, always the babysitter, and my parents had okayed me walking by myself. I would drop by with my sleeping bag and pillow after they picked up my little brother from practice. I was running a little late, so the sun was just setting as I approached the park. As I crunched my way across the grass next to the tennis court, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Turning my head, I saw a figure, clearly a man, dressed in dark clothing and leaning against the brick wall of the school. He was kind of tucked into an alcove formed where the building met the fence around the playground. He was out of sight from the road. The man was just standing outside of the halo of light from the lamp above a nearby door. The man was just lounging in the crux of the wall and the fence. What initially caught my eye was the flicker of the lit cigarette in his mouth. It was too dark to see his features, but I could tell, as I noticed him, that he was already watching me. He was a fair distance away across the grass, but it was just open space between us. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. I felt that uneasy tingle creep down my spine. I suddenly realized that I was alone in the growing dark, and there was some unknown man tracking me with his eyes, and I couldn't make out. Instead of continuing to cut diagonally across the park, I veered right toward the sidewalk and the street so that I wouldn't come too close to him. I walked a little faster, trying to shake off my uneasiness. I was telling myself, "You're just being silly." And the first time that I glanced back, he hadn't moved, though I could still feel him watching me. As I left the grass of the park and I approached the street corner, I felt briefly relieved. I was back under the street lamps, which by now had flicked on. Only 3 or 4 short blocks until I was at the church. I glanced back once more to reassure myself that I had worried for no reason, expecting to see nothing. By now, the man should be completely out of view, right? Instead, I felt the pit of dread in my stomach turn to acidic fear when I realized that the man was in fact halfway across the park now, walking in my direction. I immediately crossed to the other side of the street and I began walking faster. At this point, I could feel the adrenaline rushing through me. I didn't have any real words or images to describe what I thought would happen to me. It was just a jumble of snippets of news reports and vague fears about what happens to young girls who are out alone at night. I was still trying to convince myself that it could just be a coincidence. The man could just be walking in the same direction. After another block, as I approached the next corner, I looked back again. The man had reached the edge of the park, and instead of walking straight ahead, he too had crossed the street to my side. And even worse, it seemed like he had closed some of the distance between us. And to my eyes at least, it seemed like he was walking faster. I immediately felt my terror increase. At this point, I was convinced that he was a predator and I had made myself easy prey. I still had 2.5 blocks to the church, but at this point, I was wondering whether I would ever make it to the lock-in. I glanced back at the man once more, and he had closed the gap even further with his longer legs. I still couldn't clearly see his face, but I had seen enough. I turned around, and I started all out running up the street. My backpack thumped against my back, my heart raced, and my breath turned shallow. I ran all the way to the church parking lot before I looked back again, and by the time that I did, the man was gone. To this day, I have no idea if that man was after me, or if he just thought that I was some weird kid running down the street at dusk. Frankly, I'm glad never to have found out, one way or the other. I never post anything on Reddit, but I have to share this story because it really affected me as a child. When I was about 12 or 13, I used to play a lot of video games with my best friend, and we often played shooters together. As you can imagine, it's easy to get frustrated, and at one point, I ended up breaking my PlayStation controller. Since I didn't have a spare, I couldn't continue playing. So I told my friend that I had to stop. He said that I could come over and borrow his second controller since he didn't live far away and it was just a short walk. I thought, okay, and I told him that I would be over soon. So I grabbed my keys and I started walking to his house. It was already dark, and since it was winter, it was snowing and very foggy. While walking, I had a strange feeling like I was being watched. I kept looking around, but I didn't see anyone. When I arrived at his place, I picked up the controller and I saw through a window that a man was standing in the middle of the street. I pointed it out to my friend and we both wondered who or what was standing there. It did look like a person, but we couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette. Eventually, we decided to go outside and see if the person needed help or if something was wrong. We stepped out and asked what was going on, but there was no response. The person just stared at us and then walked away. We were both confused and then we told his parents, but they just brushed it off thinking that we were imagining things because we played too many video games. And after a while, I figured that it was time to head home. Since we had played video games together for a while, I almost forgot about the strange encounter. But when I was walking back, I started to feel that same eerie sensation of being watched. I saw a few passerby, but they all seemed normal, nothing strange. But just before I got home, I looked behind me one last time and I saw that person again, this time standing behind a tree staring at me. Then they started walking toward me and eventually they began running. I could tell that it was an older man, probably around 60, but I was surprised at how fast he was running. He was shouting something in a language that I didn't understand, but he didn't seem happy. I ran for my life, clutching my keys, and tried to unlock my door as fast as possible. And when I got inside, I quickly glanced back, but the man was gone. I rushed to my room, and I immediately told my friend about what just happened. He suggested that I call the police, which I did. But since my description wasn't very detailed, the police took a report, but didn't seem to take it too seriously. My parents were visibly shocked, but nothing ever came out of it. In my village, 4 other people reported similar experiences, saying that someone was watching or following them. I was one of them, but no one was ever caught by the police. To this day, no one knows who this man is, whether he's just trying to scare people or if it's something more sinister. No one knows for sure, but everyone agrees that it seems to be a man around 60 years old. Beyond that, no one can give a detailed description. That day, I feared for my life. I've told many of my friends about this, and I have received mixed reactions. Some said it sounds like a spooky campfire story, while others believed me and were visibly scared. A few even told me that they had experienced the exact same thing. A few years back, my mom, 46 and female, my sister, 23 female, and I, 28 female, were driving to the shops when we noticed an old car tailgating us. As we pulled into the shopping center car park, we couldn't see the car behind us anymore, so we assumed that he had driven off. Just as we pulled into our parking spot, The same old car sped into the space directly in front of us, and we saw the driver. He was maybe in his 40s, and he looked really angry. He got out of his car, and he kept looking back at us as he walked into the shop. Just as we thought that he was gone, we saw him poke his head out around the door and then look at us again. This really freaked us out, so we decided to go park somewhere else. That's when he noticed him running out of the shopping center and then looking through all the cars for us. At this point, we were really getting freaked out, and keep in mind, this was a busy shopping center in the middle of the day, so it just seemed so strange. Eventually, he spotted our car and randomly stopped what he was doing to stare at his phone. My sister and I decided to run over to the security guard and then tell him what was happening. The guard went over to him, said something, and then the guy looked over at us again before getting into his car and then driving off. He must have been on something, but it was really freaky. Hi everyone. I would like to share my story. I apologize if some writing may be off. I'm not a native speaker, and I asked Google Translate plus my little English to help me write my own experience down. So here we go. Working at the little coffee shop on the corner had always been a pleasant part of my life. It was a cozy spot, a place where regulars came to escape the rush of the city, to linger over steaming cups and quiet conversations. I loved being part of their routines, their familiar faces, and the small interactions that made my shifts enjoyable. One regular stood out among the rest though, a man named Thomas. He was in his mid-30s with a mild demeanor and a penchant for black coffee. Every morning without fail, he'd take a seat by the window with a notebook, scribbling away as the world passed by outside. At first, I thought nothing of it. Many patrons found comfort in the routine, and Thomas seemed no different. He always greeted me with a polite nod, his eyes lingering just a second longer than necessary. I brushed it off as friendliness. After all, in a place like this, regulars became part of my shop's character. Thomas's visits became so predictable that I hardly noticed him sometimes. He was just another piece in the tapestry of my workdays. But then, subtle changes began to occur. Thomas started arriving earlier and staying a bit longer than usual. His questions about the coffee shop turned personal. He was inquiring about my preferences, my work schedule, my hobbies. I tried to answer politely, but I was also maintaining the distance expected between a barista and a customer. The exchanges, while innocuous at first, began to feel a little more intrusive. One rainy afternoon, while wiping tables, I found a note tucked beneath a mug at Thomas's usual spot. It was nothing more than a thank you for the coffee and the atmosphere, but it kind of unnerved me. He wrote my name with a heart on the side. He had left it on purpose, a message for me alone. I just crumpled the note, dismissing it as an odd gesture from an eccentric patron. But days turned into weeks, and he started leaving small gifts for me. A bookmark, a pen, a flower. I accepted them, but the gestures were becoming a pattern, one that I couldn't easily ignore. One evening after closing, I found a postcard slipped under the door. It bore a simple message that says, "Thank you. You make my day so much brighter." His name was scrolled at the bottom, and I felt a chill, a realization that his interest had crossed the line into something personal, something unwanted. I confided in my manager, a kind woman named Susan. She listened carefully, her expression concerned but also understanding. We decided to monitor the situation at first to see if it would escalate. She assured me that I wasn't alone, which was a small comfort in an increasingly uncomfortable situation. Thomas's behavior continued though, his visits more frequent. He used to come to the shop 2 to 3 times a week, but now he's here almost every single day. He never crossed the boundary into overt hostility, but his presence was wearing me down. Each shift, I found myself on edge, scanning the shop for his familiar face, dreading the sound of the bell announcing his arrival. One day, as I finished my shift, I noticed him outside standing across the street watching. My heart raced, a mix of anger and fear. It felt like an invasion that separated my professional life from my personal space. I just tried to hurry home. I began to change my routine. I left the shop at different times, taking varied routes home and different shifts at work. I hoped the changes would dissuade him, signal my discomfort and uninterest. But Thomas was persistent. The gifts kept coming. It was left on the counter sometimes when I wasn't looking. Small tokens that made my skin crawl. I wanted to file a report with the local authorities. I just wanted to document the situation in case it escalated. The officer that I spoke with was sympathetic. He was explaining the limits of what could be done without direct threats or evidence of the harassment from Thomas. I know, the system, though well-intentioned, it offered me little comfort. I took additional precautions. I changed my phone number. I adjusted privacy settings on my social media. I just made sure that my personal information wasn't easily accessible. The breaking point came one evening as I closed the shop. The street was dark and it was illuminated only by the glow of streetlights. While I was walking home, I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, but unmistakable. My pulse quickened, instinct pushing me to quicken my pace, and I reached my building, my heart pounding in my chest. Later, from the safety of my apartment, I tried peering through the blinds to see. Thomas was there, and he stood on the opposite sidewalk. The sight filled me with dread, the realization that avoidance and subtle hints had failed. I was facing something that I couldn't ignore. The next day, Susan and I arranged for a colleague to escort me home after my shifts, an interim solution until a more permanent one could be found. The support of the coffee shop staff was a small beacon in a challenging time that I was in. Their presence and support was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. The final encounter came on a sunny afternoon. Thomas went inside of the shop, directly to the counter. He was calm, yet with intent. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken acknowledgement of all that had passed between us. His expression was different though. It looked calm and something like he's given up. He just placed the final note on the counter, turned, and left. It read simply, "Goodbye," and that was it. Just as how it started suddenly one day, it also just stopped. I would never understand what was going through that man's head, but I appreciate the fact that he did not end up harming me and I was able to escape this ordeal unscathed. Though I will admit that I still get nervous at times when I hear the bell ring in the coffee shop, thinking that it may be Thomas returning. I am a nurse who works the night shift, and there have been 2 occasions when I have been stalked on my way home, and I'd like to share them with you. This happened when I lived in Tokyo. I was returning home on the last train of the night and it was around 12:30 a.m. When you get off the train and exit the subway, there is a convenience store at the top of the stairs. My apartment at that time was about 7 minutes away from the store in a residential area. At that time of night, when you get off the last train home, the lights of the convenience store are pretty much the only light source in the area. and the roads are usually empty too. Well, back to the story. I was climbing up the subway stairs, and I noticed a man waiting at the top of the stairs staring at me. He kept widening his eyes as he stared at me. He was shifting around restlessly, and at that moment, I knew that the guy was weird. I ignored the traffic lights, and I crossed the road. I took a quick look over my shoulder, and I decided to quickly walk home since the situation was a bit creepy. But as I was walking, I felt a presence behind me. I looked over my shoulder and I noticed that the weird guy from the subway was following me, and he was closing the distance between us. Without any hesitation or thought, I instinctively started running. I remember running like crazy, and I was so panicked and frightened. There was no one on the streets to help me, no cars passing by, and it was so dark. I ran up a path in someone's private garden, pushed the gate aside, and I hid there. I crept around the back of the house, and it looked over a road. I saw a taxi passing by, and I saw my chance. The taxi driver must have seen how desperate I was and slowed down and saved me that night. After this event, I moved to an apartment right in front of a different train station, and this area seemed much safer as it had a 24-hour taxi rank, buses, and it was well lit, and it was busy with people even at night, so it was reassuring. I had been living in my new place for about 2 years when something else happened to me. Of course, it took place when I was coming home from my night shift. In those days when I left the hospital to go home, I used to take a shortcut through a dark alley. It was there that I am certain that I had met the same man again, and I quickly headed to the train station. I boarded my train, and I saw him again as I sat down. The man was staring at me. He must have followed me onto the train. I had a terrible feeling about this. He kept glancing at me and fidgeting in his seat. The train pulled into my station, and I got close as I could to the doors. And as soon as they opened, I ran as fast as I could, and I ran to an exit that I knew to be busy. I took my jacket, and I tried to blend into the crowds of people. When I found a safe place to hide, I looked over my shoulder, and he was there, desperately searching the area. I knew how much danger I was in. Luckily, there was a police box at the west exit of the station. In the following days, I became paranoid that the man might know where I live or will be waiting to ambush me next time that I got off at this station. I told the police everything about the man, and one of the officers seemed to know the man that I was speaking of and then described him as perverted. When he said that, shivers went down my spine. There are lots of young nurses in Japan who work late like I did back then. It's 10 years on, and I still get creeped out thinking about it. As peaceful as Japan is, be careful while walking home at night. My name is Sarah. I'm a female, and I'm now in my 30s. I'm living a different life far from where I grew up. But there's a story from my teenage years that still lingers in my mind, one that I have never fully shaken off. It happened in what seemed like the safest neighborhood, a place that felt like nothing bad could ever touch us. I grew up in a small, close-knit community where everyone knew each other. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked during the day and the kids played freely in the streets. There was a strong sense of trust and care among the neighbors, always ready to lend a helping hand or keep an eye out for one another. My family had lived there for years, and over time, we have created bonds with those around us. It was comforting to know that we had such good people nearby. Neighbors would check on each other's homes when someone went on vacation, and there were regular barbecues and gatherings that kept us all connected. Among our neighbors was Mr. Pierce, a man in his 50s who lived just a few houses down. He was always around helping with yard work or chatting with the parents as they watched their kids play. He was a tall man with graying hair and a kind smile, wearing thick glasses that seemed to magnify his gentle eyes. He never married, never had a child, and all I knew was that he was living alone. I had known him since I was a little girl, so I never thought twice about his presence. Fast forward, I grew older and I entered my teenage years, and I, of course, began to change physically. Like most teens, I started dressing differently. I was experimenting with fashion as I figured out who I was. It was a time of self-discovery, as you might say, of feeling out new identities and expressing myself in ways that I hadn't before. Well, that's when the letters began. They were anonymous at first, left on our porch or slipped through the mail slot. The letters were unsettling, filled with comments about my appearance, my body, and how I was blossoming into a young woman. At first, I tried to brush them off as a prank, something silly that would stop if I ignored it. But they didn't. They got more personal and more invasive. I kept the letters to myself. I was unsure of how to explain them to my parents without causing alarm or feeling embarrassed. Part of me thought that I was overreacting, that it was just someone being stupid and careless. I know you'd scold me. I'd scold myself too. I should have brought this up to any adult's attention, but I kept my mouth shut. I was a teenager, and our brains just worked differently during that age. I thought that I was the one who is getting in trouble if this comes out. But then came that night. My parents were out and I was home alone, which wasn't really new for me. I was watching TV, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, when I heard a knock on the door. I froze, I stood up, and then I walked to the door and checked the peephole. It was Mr. Pierce. I opened the door, and he was standing there, looking at me with a strange intensity that I have never seen before. My heart suddenly started to race. I didn't understand why. He started talking, his voice calm and steady. He was then saying things that made my skin crawl. He spoke about how he'd watched me grow up and how beautiful I have become, that I have somehow blossomed into this pretty young lady, how the way I dressed was a signal, a call for someone like him to approach me. He said things that made me realize that he was the one behind the letters. I felt trapped, my mind racing to find a way out, because I understood that I was not in a safe situation. This was Mr. Pierce standing in front of me, but I don't know who this man is anymore. While he was saying all of this, I didn't even realize that he was slowly inching his way in the house. Like I was in a daze and my mind was reeling, but the sound of the door closing and the lock snapped me out of it. Somehow, I managed to blurt something out. I don't even remember what it was, but it caught him off guard for a couple of seconds, and it gave me the chance to bolt towards my bedroom. I slammed the door behind me and I locked it. I didn't have a phone at that time, and my room did have a window, but it was high above the ground that I would surely get hurt if I jumped. The four walls of my room suddenly felt like they were closing in on me, and Mr. Pierce was right outside, banging on the door yelling for me to let him in. My heart pounded in my chest, each bang on the door matching my racing pulse. I had no idea what to do, and fear paralyzed me as I pressed my back against the door, hoping that it would hold. I prayed for help, for someone to come, for this nightmare to end. He kept screaming at me through the door, telling me all the things that he was going to do with me and how he would end me once he was done. I thought that that would be my last night alive. But then, amidst the chaos, I heard the faint sounds of sirens. I wasn't sure if it was coming for me, but relief washed over me, thinking that someone had heard the commotion and called for help. The banging on the door stopped, replaced by the sound of Mr. Pierce's hurried footsteps retreating. The police arrived swiftly and apprehended him, though, leading him away in handcuffs. It turned out that one of our neighbors, a kind woman with a young child, had heard the noise and called the police. She hadn't been able to come over herself, fearing for her safety and her child, but she did what she could to make sure that help was on the way. I was overwhelmed with gratitude and relief. I later thanked her profusely for her quick thinking. She had acted as my guardian angel that night, and her kindness left a lasting impact on me. The incident actually shook our neighborhood. It was a wake-up call that even in the safest places, darkness can lurk just next door. But it also reinforced the strength of the community, the way we looked out for one another. Though years have passed and I have since moved away, I often think back to that safe neighborhood that wasn't as safe as it seemed. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but it was a reminder that I carry with me, ensuring that I remain aware and protective, both of myself and of those around me, especially my children. Hi, I'm Lily, and I'm 28 years old, and I work in a mid-sized marketing firm. It's a pretty standard job with lots of brainstorming sessions, endless client meetings, and the occasional team-building exercise that always seems to involve awkward icebreakers. The office itself is open and lively, with a mix of cubicles and communal tables. On any given day, you'll hear the hum of chatter mingling with the clicks of keyboards. My role as a marketing coordinator is mostly managing projects and keeping track of deadlines. I like my work, and my colleagues are generally a nice bunch, though we're all more acquaintances than friends. Among them is Fred, a quiet guy from IT who everyone knows but never really notices. Fred is always around in a distance, fixing computers, setting up new systems, and generally being the go-to tech guy. Though he doesn't go to your specific cubicle unless there is a general update or if you complain about a problem with your system or computer. He's a bit of an enigma, really. Polite but reserved, always ready to help, but never one to join in on post-work drinks. We would exchange pleasantries, sure, but nothing beyond that. Everything seemed routine until the day that I found a note on my desk. It was a simple handwritten letter tucked under my keyboard. At first, I thought it was an office memo, maybe a reminder about an upcoming meeting. But as I read it, I realized that it was a love letter. It was a bit flattering, but also unsettling because it was so out of the blue. The letter didn't have a name on it, just some vague expressions of admiration and a hint of someone watching me. I shrugged it off, assuming it was a prank or a mistake. I mean, who wouldn't, right? I mentioned it to a couple of colleagues who just laughed it off, suggesting that it was probably just someone messing around, or they kept teasing me that I now have a secret admirer and my single days will almost be over. A few weeks passed and another letter appeared. This one was more personal, noting things about my day-to-day life that weren't common knowledge, like the fact that I always grab coffee from the little shop across the street before my work starts, or how I like to take my lunch breaks outside when the weather was nice. I started to feel a bit uneasy. It was one thing to get a random note, but this was different. Someone was really watching me, and the idea that they were close enough to notice these details made my skin crawl. Still, I don't know what to do about it. I hadn't seen anyone suspicious hanging around, and there was no clear evidence of who it might be. But the letters kept coming, each one more detailed than the last. They were always left on my desk tucked under my keyboard or slipped into my bag when I wasn't looking. I wondered if it was a colleague playing some twisted game, but no one seemed out of the ordinary. I was getting worried, but my workmates just kept saying that it was probably nothing, just an intense crush that someone had for me. But then, things started disappearing from my desk. At first, it was minor. A pen here, a sticky note there. I barely noticed it until it escalated to things like a framed picture of my family disappearing and then reappearing a few days later, slightly askew, as if it had been handled. I reported it to HR, but they couldn't do much without proof of wrongdoing. They promised to keep an eye out, but nothing really changed. Meanwhile, I noticed Fred seemed to be around more often. He didn't act differently, wasn't overtly suspicious, but something in his demeanor made me uneasy. The realization came one afternoon when I caught a glimpse of him hovering near my desk when I returned a bit earlier from lunch. He seemed startled, mumbling something about needing to check the computer systems in the area, but it struck me as odd because they already did that last week, and why was he only checking mine? I was now getting extremely suspicious of Fred. There was nothing wrong with my PC. And again, he only comes when we report something to him or if something needs some fixing. Soon after, I started receiving messages online from a profile that seemed faked. They were vague at first, and then they grew into confessions of love and promises that we were meant to be together. It was the same writing style as the letters. My heart raced and I finally connected the dots. It had to be Fred. I took it to management, who agreed to speak with him, and Fred denied everything, of course, and without concrete evidence, they couldn't take it further. They suggested that I just clean up my desk, like take home important items to me, like my family photos and stuff. They also suggested to just block the online stalker and also just to ignore the letters if I ever get more. They told me that I should be more vigilant, which only heightened my anxiety. I began to feel trapped, always looking over my shoulder. Well, things escalated further when I found a small gift box on my desk. Inside was a delicate bracelet that had gone missing from my home weeks ago. I thought that I just misplaced it or something, but it was a clear message that whoever it was, they'd been inside my house. I feel violated, scared, and unsure of what would happen next. I knew that I had to be careful, and I was more guarded than ever. Then one night, as I was winding down from a long day at the office, I heard noises from outside my apartment. My heart pounded as I approached the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. There he was, Fred, lurking just beyond the porch light's glow, trying to stay hidden, but clearly casing my place. Panic set in. I couldn't believe that it had come to this. I immediately called the police, whispering my fears into the phone. They urged me to stay inside and then remain calm, promising me that help was on the way. The minutes stretched like hours as I waited. Each creak and rustle outside made me jump, and when the police arrived, they caught Fred trying to pry open a window. He was arrested, finally putting an end to this ordeal that I've been going through. The officers reassured me that I had done the right thing by calling them and promised to keep me informed about the case. This experience left me shaken and more cautious than ever. It's hard to trust your surroundings after something like that, knowing how easily normal can turn into a nightmare. But fortunately, life at work slowly returned to normal. Well, I say normal, but ever since that incident, I always kept a wary eye on new and familiar faces, making sure that no one else tried to cross those lines again. Let's just say, if something feels off, it probably is. And in those moments, it's important to speak up and seek help because you never know what people are capable of when they let their obsession take over. So, Fred, you obsessed creep who tried to break in my house, I hope I never see you again. I would like to share an experience that I've had a couple years ago, which I considered as the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I'm Emily, 27 and female. So here we go. In today's world, social media has become a big part of our lives. And just like everyone else, I also share snippets of my day, my thoughts, and sometimes my plans for the future. It's mostly my thoughts and my art though. It's a way to stay connected with my friends and family, especially since moving to a new city for my job as a graphic designer, which was both exciting and a little lonely. The new city was everything I hoped for. It was full of culture, art, and opportunities. It had a vibrant art scene, perfect for someone like me trying to make a mark in design. I started following local art groups and events on social media. I was aiming to get involved and maybe make new friends along the way. As I settled into this new chapter, I noticed a particular user who frequently liked and commented on my post. At first, it was encouraging to have a little support, especially from someone who seemed to appreciate my art and my thoughts. This user, who went by the name ArtLover23, was a constant presence online, always quick with a positive comment or a thoughtful reply. At first, I was flattered. In a city where I was still finding my footing, having someone who appreciated my work felt nice. But gradually, ArtLover23's interactions became more frequent and personal. They started commenting on older posts and then sending private messages, asking detailed questions about my projects and also my daily activities. I figured that this was just part of the social media landscape, people being more forward online than they might be in person. I replied politely when I felt comfortable, just keeping things casual and friendly, as I would with any online acquaintance. But as time went on, I began noticing ArtLover23 knew more about my life than I had shared publicly. They mentioned places that I had visited, often within a day of my being there, even when I hadn't posted about it until later. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. Maybe they lived nearby or followed similar pages and events. But soon, it became clear that they were tracking my movements. I'd post a picture from a cafe, and they would comment something like, that place makes the best lattes. Almost as if they had been there too. It was a bit unsettling, the way someone could be so tuned into my life without ever meeting me. I started to feel uneasy. It seemed like no matter where I went, ArtLover23 was a step behind. One day, while attending a gallery opening, I noticed someone watching me from across the room, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that it might be my mysterious follower, though I had no way of proving it. After that night, the private messages from ArtLover23 increased, and they started suggesting that we meet up. Well, this was too much. I like sharing my art and my thoughts online, but meeting a stranger who knew so much about me was a line that I was not willing to cross. I decided to scale back on what I shared online, adjusting privacy settings and being more mindful of the details that I revealed. It was a bit disappointing because I enjoyed connecting with fellow artists, but my safety had to come first. Despite my efforts, ArtLover23 continued to comment and message, almost as if they hadn't noticed the change. It was as if nothing could deter their interest. I even stopped responding to their messages, hoping that they'd get the hint. But still, they persisted unfazed by my silence. Some of you might be thinking, why didn't I just block the person, right? And to be honest, I have no answer for that. I have no idea why I haven't even thought about that. But it gets worse. The situation escalated when I received a package at my apartment. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address. Inside were art supplies, the exact kind that I used that I posted about before, and a note that read, "For your next masterpiece." My heart skipped a beat. How could someone know my address? It was a terrifying reminder that my life was no longer just my own. But maybe it was from a family member. So, before I did anything, I tried reaching out to my family, my close friends who knew where I lived, but all of them said the same thing, that they have no idea what I'm talking about. I was just fed up at this moment and I was frightened, so I decided that it was time to take action. I sent a strong message to Art Lover 23 telling them that I was aware of their behavior and that if it continued, I wouldn't hesitate to involve the authorities. I laid it all out, explaining how their actions had crossed the line and were making me feel unsafe. Their response was immediate. Art Lover 23 at first tried to deny stuff, but then they end up admitting it. They then apologized and started begging for me to not involve the police and that they will stop bothering me. Art Lover 23 finally went silent after that. The messages stopped and they seemed to disappear from my online world as quickly as they had arrived. I just felt the weight lift off my shoulders. My takeaway from this experience, and something that should be a takeaway for you too, is that we should be careful with what we share online to keep our peace of mind and safety. So, everyone, please stay safe. Hello everyone, I'm a female and 28. This year, I decided to throw myself a birthday party, something that I hadn't done in a long time. Between work and life's chaos, celebrations often fell by the wayside, but I felt like this year should be different. I wanted a chance to gather my closest friends, to laugh, enjoy good food, and just simply unwind together on my special day. The idea of a party was exciting, and as I started planning, I imagined a cozy evening filled with laughter and warmth. I planned to cook some of my favorite dishes, ones that brought back memories and were sure to please my friends. There were dishes like spicy buffalo wings, a creamy pasta salad, and a homemade chocolate cake that I had perfected over the years. And to make it extra special, I decided to try a new drink recipe, something vibrant and fun, perfect for a festive evening. But of course, to pull it off, I needed supplies. So after work one evening, I headed to the grocery store, list in hand, full of anticipation and a little bit of stress from the day. It was around 6 p.m., and the store was bustling with people getting their last-minute shopping done, and the aisles were crowded and lively. As I navigated through the produce section, I noticed a man who seemed to be following me. At first, I thought nothing of it. The store was crowded, and it was easy to end up on the same path as someone else. But as I moved through different sections looking for ingredients, I kept seeing him. He was a tall man with a scruffy beard, wearing a faded baseball cap and a jacket that looked too warm for the mild weather. His presence started to make me feel uneasy. Whenever I paused to look at something, he was there, just lingering nearby. I tried to focus on my list: olives, cheese, a special pasta for the salad, but I could feel his eyes on me, just watching. And then, he started asking me questions, his voice low and casual, like we were old friends. He was asking me how to make a good pasta sauce, where to find the spices, trivial things that felt out of place. I mean, if he wanted to know where things are, I'm not the one he should be asking. But I tried to answer politely, trying to not show my discomfort, hoping that he would pick up on the cues and just leave me be. But every time that I moved on, hoping that he'd get the message, he seemed to reappear just around the corner, still watching, still there. It became a pattern as I continued. I'd turn down an aisle and he would be there. I'd stop to compare prices, and he'd casually wander, pretending to be interested in something nearby. My heartbeat quickened, and an unwelcome sense of anxiety creeping in. This was supposed to be a simple shopping trip, but now I just wanted to get out there with my groceries and my peace of mind. Finally, I decided to just rush through the remainder of my list, deciding to skip a few items in favor of leaving sooner. At the checkout, I kept glancing over my shoulder, hoping that he would have disappeared into the crowd. But as I packed my bags and headed towards the exit, I saw him again, leaning casually against the wall near my car. My stomach twisted. The thought of approaching my car alone was too unsettling. I knew I needed some sort of assistance, someone to be with me in case this stranger decided to follow me further or tried to do anything. So I approached an employee who was stocking shelves near the front of the store. I was explaining the situation as calmly as I could. The employee nodded, clearly concerned, and then arranged for someone from security to escort me. I felt a wave of relief, thankful for their understanding and swift action. The security guard was kind, walking with me to my car as the man watched from a distance. And when he saw that I was not alone, he slowly walked away and then disappeared into the darkness. When my groceries finally packed away, I thanked the security guard profusely, grateful for not having to face the unsettling situation alone. And I drove and got home safely, thankfully. I got transferred to a rural area of Kanto with work. It wasn't the worst timing in my life, to be honest, because my child was just about to start kindergarten, so it felt like the move wouldn't disrupt our lives too much. We enrolled our child into a school, and over a short space of time, we were introduced to a few of the other parents. I was surprised when I realized that I recognized one of the faces in the crowd. I saw someone that I went to high school with, who we will refer to as A in the story. It was a surprising coincidence, but the truth of the matter was that A and I weren't that close. We were just in the same classes at school, and I'm sure you can relate to what I am saying. Just for clarification, I'm a guy and she is a woman. Bear that in mind for this next part. One weekend earlier this year, I got a knock on my door. I was having dinner with my wife at the time, and we weren't expecting company that night. I went to the door and I looked through the peephole, and I saw a strange man outside there. I opened the door, expecting it to be a neighbor stopping by, but it wasn't. The guy said, "Hey, I'm A's husband. You know why I'm here, don't you?" I don't know what to say to this guy, and of course, I didn't know why he was here. My only thoughts were about getting back to my dinner. He said some other stuff that I didn't really understand or care about, and I quickly became impatient with him and his conversation, so I cut him off mid-sentence and asked, "Look, do you need something?" And as soon as I asked that, I knew that I had just pushed him to the edge. I would expect that kind of attitude from a guy like you, because you're the kind of guy who thinks it's fine to put your hands all over someone's wife, aren't you? He was close to yelling, and I could tell that he had come here to cause a scene or embarrass me. I stood there in shock. I didn't know what he was talking about. Just as I was thinking, "Oh great, I met the local lunatic," I heard my wife padding down the hall towards the front of the door to join us. The guy at the door then thrust a piece of paper at us both and then ordered us to read it. I could tell from the first glance that it was a printout of some kind. That printout turned out to be from his wife, A's, blog. That acquaintance of mine from my school days. I looked through it, trying to make heads or tails of what this man is accusing me of. I was utterly shocked to find that the printout was a catalog of lies. His wife had imagined a relationship between her and me. It was as if she had written her fantasies down. I need to tell you a little bit about what I saw on those pages, so here it goes. I was reunited with, and then she mentions my name. I had such a crush on him at school. Apparently, he moved here through work. What a wonderful coincidence. I know where he works and what window he sits by at work. It feels so good to have him so close by again. When his wife stepped away for a few moments at kindergarten, he asked me to give him my email address, and I did it. It was such a thrill. From that day onward, I received an email from him every day. He took me out to dinner and asked me to keep it a secret from his wife. Well, I get on with his wife kind of well, but I like him too much to stop all the fun, so I went along with his lies, and I did as he asked. I can't believe that this guy is sending me such dirty emails while keeping a straight face when I see him and his wife at kindergarten. Next, he told me that he would take some paid time off and ask if I wanted to go on a drive with him to a secluded area. I did want to go with him, so we met up. We had lunch at a swanky hotel, and then we checked into our room. His fingers are mine. And it just went on and on like that. She listed more personal details about me, which I don't wish to share online, and I don't know how she found them out. Needless to say, I didn't check into some hotel with her. I didn't send her erotic messages, and hey, I didn't even ask for her email address. It was all lies. Her husband wasn't interested in my side of the story. He just said things like, "If it's not you, then who else just moved to our area that you went to school with? Who else has the same name as you? And who else works where you work?" Apparently, these rumors had been spreading for a while. It didn't feel great to know that we were probably getting pointed at and spoken behind our backs. The friends we thought we had made likely all thought that I was cheating on my wife, and that just wasn't true. I found out about the fact that A's blog post began to include plans for her and I to run away and elope, and in her words, we promised each other that we would abandon our current families. This all came out when a friend of A contacted her husband to let him know about her blog post. Her husband apparently didn't even know that she kept a blog, but became utterly furious when he discovered what she had been writing. He confronted her, and she doubled down with her delusion. He said she cried as he told him about it. I can only assume that those were tears of embarrassment or guilt, but not guilt of cheating, because she was innocent of that and so was I. Well, those tears and her inability to tell the truth led to the angry husband at my door. He didn't seem to be interested in anything I said. He was here to yell at me, and it looked like he wanted to go further than that. I showed him my phone, my emails, but it made no difference. This guy didn't want to see sense. He said that I could have deleted all the emails and calls, and I could have been using different accounts and etc. He was adamant that I had done all these things that he had read on his wife's blog. It wasn't until my wife stepped in that he was willing to listen to the voice of reason. Excuse me, but the only proof you seem to have is your wife's blog post, right? Why don't you go and see if you can gather any other evidence, and I will do my own evidence gathering this side, and by all means, if you find something compelling enough to come back here, I will open our door to you again. Give me a couple of days. And with that, he packed away all his little printouts from his wife's bogus blog and left. I was confident in my ability to be proven innocent, so I had no fear when I received an invitation from A and her husband to meet at a family restaurant to discuss our issue further. I guess that some people might find that a bit weird of me and my wife to agree to meet them, but let me just say that when you have been accused of something that you know you are innocent of, and you feel like all the eyes of the community have been on you for the longest time, then you would be eager, like me, to clear your name, I imagine. We headed to the restaurant. At least it was a neutral setting with many potential witnesses. I saw the husband there with all his printouts again. He wasn't alone though. There, sat next to him was the cause of all my problems. A from high school. My wife and I didn't come empty-handed though. We arrived with receipts, literally. Cell phone records, credit card statements, timesheets, business trip information, the whole 9 yards. None of it would match her blog post, and I had an alibi for every occasion. Then, as if a light went on in the husband's mind, he turned to A and asked, "If you're not talking about this guy, who the hell are you cheating on me with?" I was so convinced that A was about to say something like, "Oh, I just made the whole thing up because I was bored." My wife agreed with this theory. I just have to quickly thank her for her understanding about the whole situation because it could have been a lot worse without her support. So, we expected her to say that she made it up, but instead, she actually gave her husband a name of some other guy. I didn't know who he was though. I asked her who he was, and I noticed that there was a silence on the other side of the table. The name she spoke had significance. I looked at the man, A's husband, and he looked pale. "Are you talking about my brother?" Yep, surprisingly, she was having an affair with her husband's brother and seemed happy enough for me to be the shield for their affair. I get it. It must hurt less when it's not your brother. But why fuck up my life? A started to blurt out some reasons for her affair with his brother at that point. You always come home late. You work national days. You don't care much about your family, clearly. It was inevitable that I would end up feeling so lonely, can't you see? Sorry to say, but my brother-in-law was there when you weren't." I went ahead and asked the question that had been on my mind since her husband darkened my door. "Why the hell did you involve me? Why did you make all that stuff up about me? Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused me?" In response, all she did was wail like a scolded toddler. I knew that I would never get a straight answer out of her, but to my shock, she blurted out something close to a tangible reason. She said that she was embarrassed by her brother-in-law's age difference and social status. Apparently, he was older than me and only worked part-time. He took her to internet cafe dates, and it was one of those moments that she fantasized about high-class dates. And I guess that's where the blog post started. In the end, I didn't feel any embarrassment. I was proven innocent, and my wife was vindicated for sticking by my side. I was ready to walk away from this too, and I was already looking forward to have nothing to do with them ever again. Before I walked out of the family restaurant store, the husband stopped me, and he just approached me and said, "Man, I'm so sorry." I accepted, of course. He bowed his head and made a huge show of it. He didn't need to do that. Actually, that was probably the only point where I felt embarrassed, if I'm being honest. The following day, a care package was delivered to our door, and it contained expensive sake and snow crab. I guess it was another one of his apologies. In the days that followed, A's daughter was absent from kindergarten, and eventually she left the school altogether. A's family seemed to have suddenly moved too. I always wondered about where they ended up and what happened to them. I actually was lucky enough to find out a few more details when I went back to my hometown, the hometown where A and I went to high school, and I was there to attend a friend's wedding. Apparently, A had moved back. Her husband had filed for divorce and taken custody of their child. She initially moved back in with her parents, but they kicked her out for some reason. Apparently, she had lots of drinking parties where she would complain about her ex and the circumstances of their divorce. Within a month or so, she was looking for a new partner, apparently, so I guess it didn't work out with her and her husband's brother. I hope that her husband finds some peace and a partner who will treat him right. I wish him no ill, and I hope he can get over that hideous betrayal. I have to be most grateful to my wife, though, for sticking by me through it all. Even though, before we went to meet them at the restaurant, and she told me that if they could prove that I was having an affair with his wife, she said she would cut off an appendage of mine and then turn it into stew. And you can guess which appendage I'm talking about, right? Yeah, I made my wife's birthday extra special that year and every year since. I am a lucky guy to have her, and I am just so glad that all that stuff is behind us now. I live a pretty normal life, working as a nurse in the local hospital. My shifts are long and often end well into the night. The drive home is my quiet time, a chance to unwind after dealing with the hustle of the ER. It's a routine that I have grown used to, finding peace in the emptiness of the road under the night sky. But a few weeks ago, something changed. It started on a Monday evening. I was heading home after a particularly exhausting shift, and as I merged onto the main road, I noticed a car following close behind. It was a dark SUV, nothing flashy, just a typical vehicle that you'd see anywhere. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lots of cars share the road, and I assumed that the driver was just heading in the same direction. But the next night, it was there again, creeping up as I left the hospital parking lot. It didn't take long for me to realize that it was the same SUV, always a few cars behind, but never out of sight. I just thought that it could be a coincidence. I mean, that person just might have the same shift and route as me, right? But there was this uneasy feeling that started to grow in the pit of my stomach. As the days went by, I became more aware of its presence. It was always there, following me through the winding roads that led to my neighborhood. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was nothing, but the more it happened, the harder it was to dismiss. I started to memorize the make and model, the small dent on the rear bumper, and the way the headlights were slightly uneven. One night, things escalated. I'd stopped at a light that turned red just as I approached. The SUV pulled up beside me, its engine rumbling in the stillness. I could feel the driver's eyes on me though, and I didn't dare to look over. When the light turned green, it sped ahead, cutting in front of me sharply. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel, steadying myself. From then on, it wasn't just following me, it was toying with me. It would speed up to catch me on straight stretches of roads, then slow down suddenly, forcing me to either overtake or trail nervously behind it. I felt trapped in this bizarre game, one that I didn't know how to win. On another occasion, as I turned onto a narrow street, the SUV swerved into my lane, forcing me towards the edge of the road. I managed to brake just in time, with my heart racing as the SUV accelerated, only to fall back into place behind me, and each encounter left me rattled, unsure of what was coming next. I started taking different routes home, hoping to shake the driver off my trail. I even tried leaving earlier or later, hoping that that would help. But no matter what I did, the SUV found me. The constant presence unnerved me, turning my once peaceful drives into a nightly dread. But the final straw came on a particularly foggy night. Visibility was low and the roads were slick with the recent rain. I just left work, tired beyond words, when the SUV appeared again. It followed closely, headlights glaring in my mirror, making it hard to see past the blinding light. As I neared the turnoff to my street, the SUV suddenly sped up, cutting into my lane and forcing me to swerve onto the shoulder. Fear and anger surged through me, and I knew that I couldn't ignore this any longer. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, dialing the police. I explained what had been happening, my anxiety lacing my voice, and they instructed me to drive straight to the police station, saying that they would send help to meet me there. Following their guidance, I turned back into the main road, trying to keep calm as I drove towards the station. The SUV stayed close, but as we neared the bright lights of the station, it suddenly veered off, speeding away into the darkness. Relief washed over me, yet mixed with frustration and fear. At the station, the officers took my report, but the mystery driver remained a ghost. They assured me that they would keep an eye out, but without a license plate or a clear photo, their hands were tied, and I just went home. The silence of my apartment, a stark contrast to the chaos of the road. The next day, the police called to inform me that they hadn't found the SUV or its driver. It's really disappointing, but I'm not surprised. But they did promise that they will update me once they find something out. But thankfully, the SUV never returned though. So, crazy creepy guy driving the SUV that followed me for days. I hope we never see each other again. My name is Mike, and I'm 35 years old. A few months ago, I made a big move to a new city, hoping to leave a complicated past behind. My old job had become stagnant, and also after a long relationship of mine ended, I felt like I needed a change to shake things up. The city seemed to offer exactly what I was looking for, a fresh start and new opportunities. The city is incredible. It was full of life and growth. It's got a thriving tech scene, which was perfect for my background in software development. There were meetups, networking events, and workshops happening almost every week, and I knew that this was the place to push my career forward and maybe even meet new people. The move turned out to be great for my personal life too. With beautiful parks and a vibrant cultural scene, I quickly fell in love with the place. Every weekend, there was something new to explore, whether it was a food festival, a music event, or just a quiet walk in one of the many green spaces it had. It felt like the city was breathing new life into me, and I was grateful for the change. As I settled in, I joined a community gym and I started attending a few local meetups to make new friends. The people here were friendly and welcoming, and I soon found myself with a decent circle of acquaintances. One of these new faces was Jenna, a lively and enthusiastic person who seemed to know everyone. She was always eager to help out, offering tips on the best places to go and introducing me to her network. At first, I appreciated Jenna's friendliness. She appeared whenever I needed advice or company, showing up at meetups, gym classes, and even at local cafes where I worked on my laptop. I brushed it off as a mere coincidence, figuring that we had similar tastes and routines. But then, Jenna started showing up more often and in more places. It felt like I couldn't attend an event or grab a coffee without running into her. She'd always be there, ready with a smile and eager to chat, knowing more and more about my schedule and my habits. It was flattering, really, but it also began to feel a bit overwhelming. I started to notice Jenna's influence creeping into other parts of my life. She began arranging social outings and subtly steering me towards certain events. Whenever I hesitated, she'd gently insist, making it hard to refuse without coming off as rude. Her enthusiasm was hard to manage, and I found myself participating in activities that I hadn't planned on, just to avoid conflict. I know, it does sound a bit like I'm a doormat, but oh well. Things started getting uncomfortable. when Jenna began showing up at my apartment building. She'd be there under the guise of dropping off something that she thought that I would like, or just passing by on her way to another destination. It was really too much, and I just couldn't call a coincidence anymore. One afternoon, I returned from work to find a care package at my door. It was filled with snacks, books, and little things that I had casually mentioned enjoying. The card simply said that it was from a friend, but I knew that it was Jenna. I felt uneasy knowing that she'd taken notes on my preferences and gone so far as to leave something at my home. Some would say that it would be flattering, but honestly, I felt it suffocating and creepy. It was just too much. Plus, despite the fact that I was single, I was not in the right mindset to be in any relationship so soon. As I mentioned earlier, I broke up from a long-term relationship just before moving, and my heart has not fully recovered yet, as corny as that may sound. So, I try to distance myself, attending fewer meetups and changing my routine slightly just to avoid constant run-ins with her. This seemed to only increase Jenna's presence though. She would text me and call me, asking why she hadn't seen me around and offering to meet up for coffee or lunch. I struggled to respond politely, hoping that she would take the hint, but she didn't. The breaking point came when Jenna found out about a new job opportunity that I was considering. She began pushing me to apply, even reaching out to contacts of hers to put in a good word for me. It was a well-meaning gesture, but it felt invasive. I hadn't even made up my mind about the job yet, and here she was, taking steps on my behalf without my consent. Feeling cornered, I decided that it was time to have a conversation with her, and I needed my space back and I wanted to draw a line before things escalated further. It was a difficult decision because Jenna genuinely seemed to want to help, but her actions were just crossing boundaries that I wasn't comfortable with. When I finally confronted her, I explained that her constant presence and involvement in my life was overwhelming me. I told her that while I appreciated her kindness, I needed her to take a step back. I also mentioned that if she continued to ignore my boundaries, I would have no choice but to completely cut her off from my life. Her reaction was a mix of surprise and hurt, but I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. I think the mention of that scared her enough to make her understand the seriousness of the situation. She apologized, promising to give me the space that I needed. After that confrontation, Jenna did keep her promise. She stopped showing up unannounced, and her messages became less frequent. I sensed that she was keeping her distance, which allowed me to finally relax and enjoy my new life in the city. This experience taught me how important it is to set boundaries and speak up when something doesn't feel right. Please, don't be like me. It took me a couple of months to do it, but I can tell you that it's definitely worth it.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.